So, in this episode of the podcast, I'm going to talk about something that I normally don't talk about, and that's country music. Now, if you listen to the podcast regularly, what you know is that we talk about all things leadership. I did an episode on Dr. Seuss. I did an episode on the book Ender's Game, the fiction book that was turned into a movie. Here, I'm a little out of my element, though. That's why I have help. And so, we're going to be talking about country music, lessons about leadership and business from country music. Stay tuned.
You are listening to The Leadersmith, Darren Gerdes.
Okay, so as I told you in the introduction, we're going to be talking about country music. Now, I have no business talking about country music. I grew up in New Jersey. I know only one person that I grew up with that actually listened to country music. So it's a new experience for me. But over the weekend, I was with a good friend of mine. His name is Maxwell Rollins. He's here. Thank you for joining us, Maxwell.
Sure, happy to be here.
Okay, so Maxwell and I were at the Christian Business Faculty Association meeting in Nashville, Tennessee. That's Music City. And so we were there presenting a paper. Oh, by the way, Maxwell, I have your copy of our Best Paper Award. Good job. I'll bring this into you
Right.
later on today. And so while we're there, oh, by the way, I'm also, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see this. If you're just listening on the podcast, you can't. But I'm seeing this is as country as I get with my guess what chicken butt shirt. So I'm trying to fit into the mold here. So we presented our paper, and then in the afternoon when we had some free time, Maxwell said, "Hey, I'm planning to go to the Country Music Hall of Fame. Do you want to join me?" And my reaction was, absolutely. Why not? I mean, it's something I know almost nothing about. Okay. So now I'm telling you all this background because anybody who's listening to this particular episode either is just willing to listen to anything that rolls out of my mouth, which is probably not the case, or they're a country music fan, which is probably more the case, right? Okay. So if they are a country music fan, I just want them to be aware right up front, I'm ignorant as the day is long about this topic. Okay. So I had no business even walking around the Country Music Hall of Fame. I mean, it was a weird experience for me, but it was really interesting. So we're walking around, and as you remember, I'm walking around going, okay, I recognize 3 people. I recognize 4 people. By the time I got about halfway through all the exhibits, I recognized maybe a dozen, and then I just kind of knocked it off. I probably recognized 2 dozen, maybe 3 dozen names tops. That's how woefully ignorant I am. Now, you, on the other hand, were almost having the opposite experience. At one point, I said, I'm up to 9. And you said, yeah, there's only about 3 that I don't know. Right now, you've been a DJ for many years. What's the name of the DJ, your mobile DJ thing here in Charleston?
Sure, J. Maxwell's Music by Request, which I've had for 40 years. But perhaps, and of course, we get requests for country music. Most of the time, the request will be the standards. But I was on 4 different radio stations as a DJ.
Right.
Even when I was very young, I say very young, we're talking junior and senior in high school.
Yeah.
And 3 out of 4 of the radio stations were country music stations.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I was never a fan of country,
But you know a ton of them.
I know it. I know it.
Like your knowledge of it was like inverse. Like I know like 1%, you had the other 99%. So it was really fascinating how much you understood about this. So and that's why I said, it would be great to unpack this. That, and you have the same business understanding, so we could track in the same ways. Okay, so we're walking around, and like I said, I recognized almost nothing, and you recognize most of it. My first really aha moment in the Country Music Hall of Fame was when I realized subjective value. And that's, from business, like something's worth more to you than it's worth to me, or vice versa. And I was thinking, I'm looking behind these glass displays and people are oohing and ahhing about things. And I see like an old guitar, old clothes, some, papers that are really old. And my first aha is that's worth nothing to me, but there are people here who would like be just thrilled to have these things. So there's a subjective value. Like some things, I would put out in a rummage sale. and they and they would think this is worth, and people will pay millions of dollars because it's related to a particular artist. So that was my first aha. And as we're walking around, I mentioned that to you, and like, but that's the only language I could speak to you. It's almost like having to translate between. You have three different speakers. You have English, somebody who can speak English and German, and somebody who can speak German and Russian. And I'm speaking English to the Russian. I mean, it's a weird kind of thing. But you saw much more value behind the cases. Tell me what you saw in the cases.
Sure. Well, you mentioned a rummage sale, and sometimes you see an old hat or an old price tag on something, and you go, the price tag is still on here. If you know who Minnie Pearl is, and you know her trademark is this little hat with some flowers and the price tag. And it turns out that the price tag, she actually did not mean to leave on there the first time she did a show. And the tag just kind of came down and people started laughing at it. And it became a part of her image. And so if you were a fan or knew who Minnie Pearl was, you're looking at the hat with the price tag. And you had seen it so many times on different shows, the Grand Ole Opry, Hee-Haw. You knew that was a part of Minnie Pearl.
Yeah, I knew the name Minnie Pearl.
From the price tag itself. Oh, my goodness.
I had heard the name Minnie Pearl, but I had no context. I had not a hook to hang that on. And you were telling me about the price tag thing. I didn't understand. I mean, it was all new experience to me. Yeah. So now what's interesting here is that as I'm walking around, I'm watching people, and for me, I'm going there like a cultural anthropologist. Right. I'm just trying to see, like, well, what's this all about? There are people who it was like a religious experience for them. It was almost a pilgrimage to them. They're like, it's I mean, they're hyperventilating, looking at things. And it was really interesting. And as a foreigner coming to this, it just seemed odd. But what it established for me is obviously there's a market, right? It's not my market. It's not one that I understand or really had cared about, but people desperately care about. And so that was somewhat revelatory to me, just how much it was. Now, you told me this interesting story, the Hee-Haw Story. Can you tell that Hee-Haw Story again? Because that was great. That really illustrates like my perception as opposed to. So go ahead.
First of all, I don't know if you said this before, but I grew up in South Georgia. And so I grew up on a farm. So a lot of the television that we watched, and clearly the music my parents listened to, was country. And there was a series on TV for many years called Hee-Haw. And it was a variety show, music and comedy. But of course, everybody on there was country, 100%. And so when I joined the Navy, and this is in the 1977, this is actually happening now in 1978, that I brought someone home with me, and he was from Michigan. Now, he had watched the TV show, I guess. He knew about Hee-Haw, but because he and I had been through boot camp together and through our machinist mate school, now we were in nuclear power school, we had been friends for about a year. I hadn't even gone home with him to Michigan. And so he listened to how I talked. And so he assumed that everyone talked like I did. And when he went home with me, my girlfriend was there at my house. My mom and dad were there. We had been there for maybe an hour, hour and a half. And he takes me out into the backyard and he goes, "Can you tell them to stop the Hee-Haw act?" Because he really thought that the whole Hee-Haw on TV was an act, and that my parents and girlfriend were kind of going along with it to kind of pull him, kind of pull his leg, make him part of some sort of joke. And I go, "Oh, this is actually how we talk here. It's just for whatever reason," because I was already a DJ, and so I didn't have a Southern voice because of that. That he thought everyone talked normal like I did.
Yeah,
And
and so what I took away from that was because you told me that story there, and I was like, "Wow, that's really interesting." And there are a couple interesting things about it, but the first part of it was like Hee Haw was reflecting their reality, and
mhm.
so it was marketing to that group. I mean, and they were responding in kind with devotion. I've seen Hee Haw on TV and went click. Right,
That's what
I
you did.
probably watched a total of 5 minutes in my life before that day. I watched 5 more minutes in the museum, so I have a total of 10 minutes now. I've expanded
Double.
my right. So I mean, just to get a sense of it, after you told me the story, I was like, oh, okay, let's see what this is. But I had no idea. So it's reflecting their lives. So again, there's this market for it, and it's speaking meaningfully to
Mhm.
a large segment of people. Okay, and that's not to say all Southerners are hee haw or anything like that. By the way, if anybody's listening to this and you're in the South, I love the South, right? I mean, I escaped New Jersey and moved to Virginia. And I've been in Virginia my entire adult life until I moved to South Carolina. Happy to be here. I just never adopted country music because it just never was my scene. Okay, but so there is this market. We've established it. Now, the second thing that came to me was segmentation. And I realized that. And I mentioned that to you while we were there. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't realize there were so many varieties of country music. Like from the early days when we're seeing the people putting together the first banjos and guitars and whatever, trying to, do something. And again, this is entertainment, right? In the 80s, you had a boombox. So maybe we've regressed, right? But I mean, they were trying to entertain themselves. So but you have different categories. And I don't know if I'm hitting very different, distinct categories. You can disabuse me, but Merle Haggard, that's a name I recognize. Big and Rich is a modern something.
Mhm.
Willie Nelson is kind of he's been around for a while, but kind of a 60s, 70s figure. Alan Jackson, probably 80s, 90s,
Mhm.
right? Now, I understand enough of them to name them and to name like really old for Merle, Big and Rich is new, Willie Nelson in that time, Alan Jackson in that time, but they're in different categories, like, and not everybody who likes one is going to like the other necessarily. And so I found that segmentation to be really, really fascinating. Help me out. What am I missing, or what can you expand? I guess there's like a bluegrass crowd as well, right? What else am I?
It's kind of similar to, I'll say, rock and roll. As a mobile DJ, for example, many times people would come up and say, "Can you play some rock and roll?" What do you mean by that? Or do
Mhm.
you want some, Buddy Holly, or do you want Led Zeppelin? And sometimes they would say, "No, no, I want some Madonna." I go, "Oh, I wasn't even thinking about Madonna being
Yeah.
rock and same thing with country. Somebody might come up and say, "Can you play some country?" And I'll go, "Oh, you betcha." And so I'll play some Hank Williams Jr.
Mhm.
No, 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 no. I want Hank Williams Sr. You know?
That's a really interesting point too. And I'm cutting you off here,
Yeah.
but are there like legacies or dynasties or things along those lines, like Hank Williams and Hank Williams Jr. and there's like heritage here too.
Sure. And just, Johnny Cash and Roseanne Cash. And before that, the Carter family, kind of a legacy there.
Right.
The Outlaws, if you will, which came out in the 70s. That was the Willie Nelson, Jesse Coulter, see Waylon and Willie, kind of the outlaw movement there. Tom Glazier. Um, and some people who really crossed over. They were both pop and country. Glenn Campbell comes to mind.
Right.
Um,
What's her name on the insurance commercials? Taylor Swift,
oh, sure.
right?
Her bus was there, right? It looked like
Yeah.
a bus. It got closer. It was like a cardboard thing. But I mean, Taylor Swift, a great example of a crossover now.
Yeah.
Because it started basically country, and now you would think of her more as pop, but she still has country, songs.
Yeah.
So, and we found some people in the Country Music Hall of Fame reference that surprised me. Peter Frampton was there. And
Mhm.
what Peter Frampton in concert with Steve Miller, my favorite artist. Why was Peter Frampton there? But he was, and others were referenced, and so there's a lot of crossover as well. We even
Elvis was there. from his early days, Elvis from his
That's
early
right.
days, right?
Sure, sure. You know, the king of rock and roll, and yet you can't talk about country without talking about Elvis.
Yeah, so that segmentation was such a fascinating thing. Like, oh, people probably like one and don't like another. You might like bluegrass and not like modern, or vice versa,
Mhm.
and that's okay. But I was so unaware of it, just in ignorance. And we do this all the time, right? People look from the outside in and think of Christianity that's monolithic. They're all the same, or they look at the Middle East and they think, oh, they're all the same. No, no, they make
Mhm.
very big distinctions between who's Sunni and Shia, and even within Sunni, who is Wahhabi as opposed to some right more secular or whatever. So the more you know, the more you see. Now, you didn't know this, but later on that day, so there was a tour to go to the Grand Ole Opry after dinner, and I wasn't going to go, but then a free ticket emerged where
Oh,
I was like, I can't not do it just for the sake of having said I've been there. So
yeah.
I've been there, right? So what a cultural field trip this was as well. So I was at the Grand Ole Opry. Now, I don't recognize any of the names in this show. Jeannie Seeley, who is some old, like, she's like 80 or something like that.
Mhm.
Riley Green, who's a new star that, again, I've never heard. I'm not going to say I never heard of, because I never heard of any of these guys. Okay. Connie Smith, a new one named Yola, who's from Britain, but doing country, which was interesting. Don Schlitz, he wrote The Gambler.
Hmm.
And so many other songs. Gary Mule Deer, who was a comedian, T. Graham Brown, and Rhonda Vincent. Now, again, I don't recognize any of them, but at the same time, it was a really interesting experience to watch. Now, what I took away from that was at the Grand Ole Opry, we saw a young lady, a new guy, a new woman from Britain who's doing modern country. We saw the guy that wrote The Gambler, and he was actually really interesting. Yeah, so I'll talk about him in a moment. Bluegrass from Kentucky, we saw hymns. The Old Rugged Cross was played, and some other. That was like the first thing I could track with, right? Were the hymns. But so there was this large segment, large conglomeration of all these different segments, but they stayed in their lane because it was all country. They weren't like branching out to rap and classical, and that would have made no sense. But within country, there was that large variation, and so that's what I saw there. Any thoughts at that point?
Well, again, it's appealing to many generations also.
Yeah.
You mentioned
Right.
Connie Smith, and I think I told you about her during our tour, the fact that she's married to Marty Stewart, and Marty Stewart's been playing with great country legends for a long time, and also in his own right. Here she's 80 years old, and yet you have a newcomer from Britain. And so if you went there, if you were a country music fan, Darren, at your age, you could also take your parents there, and you could take your children there.
Yeah.
So generations are going, I love country music.
Yeah, and then that's exactly what I observed there. They were all over the map. It
Mhm.
wasn't a like 23-year-old crowd, give or take 2 years. It was
Right.
it was very wide range. So
Mhm.
maybe that's part of the appeal with the Grand Ole Opry. I mean, I still am trying to process what I saw, but they did a really good job with that market. And so, okay, let me switch gears and talk about the next thing. Next thing I saw was the team. And so I'm aware of this kind of thing with everything business. Business is a team sport, but there was this one display there where they had these bobbleheads of all the different types of people that are needed to make this happen. So you have the musician, okay. You also have the songwriter, okay. I got that too. But you also have the attorney, the engineer, the producer, the tour manager, the publicist, the stylist, the instrument tech, the booking agent, the media manager, graphic artist, driver, merchandise person, the roadie. I mean, there's a lot that goes into this that I just wasn't seeing. In a similar vein, a friend of mine told me once that he was a big NASCAR fan. I said, "Oh, again, I grew up in New Jersey, so this isn't a big NASCAR country, but I can't understand what was so exciting about seeing the cars go around in circles." He's like, no, you don't understand. This is a team sport, and they're working together as teams to try to do this. All the background stuff, the marketing that goes into the uniforms, the teamwork that goes into getting the vehicle ready or to get it the tires changed and get it back out, and all of that is part of the drama of that. And when he explained it to me like that, I understood, because I understand team. I don't understand NASCAR still. I don't understand the driving part. Like, I would actually be more interested in what goes on behind the scenes than the actual event itself. But it's all team, and yeah, that makes sense that that's going on in the music biz as well. And you understand the music biz, so you can probably relate much more to this than I can.
I saw that same display, and it still amazed me to actually have a visual there with the little bobbleheads. And how many people were there? At least 35?
Yeah, something like that. It was a large number of just different types of people that have to be involved in order to make this happen. So
yeah, as you said, that have to be there.
Yeah,
happen. There are many others that are kind of tangents to that. I mean, all the vendors who are doing the programs, and of course, all the refreshments, all the advertising that's happening locally every time they go to a different city. So all the externals have to be there as well.
Yep, that's right.
Without that minimum, it's not happening.
We're used to seeing like the lead singer of the band getting the lion's share of the attention, right? Bono for U2 or whatever, right? But beyond that, so this was really fascinating when I was at the Grand Ole Opry. So we had the guy that the songwriter for the Gambler. Okay, Kenny Rogers wrote the Gambler. Even I know, as ignorant as I am, that the Gambler, Kenny Rogers, I get that, right? I mean, you just can't escape some things. Like the song I know best in country music is "Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Kanye," because that was funny. Okay, remember at the awards thing when they did that? Yeah, so that was pretty funny. Okay, but even I couldn't escape the Gambler. Okay, so I think his name was Don Schlitz. I hope I have the right guy name
for sure,
but I'm pretty sure that's him. Don Schlitz doesn't have a great voice. I mean, he really wasn't that great of a singer, but he had authority because he wrote the Gambler, and so he got the crowd going. So it was a weird thing that you had that authority because you were the guy that wrote the song. And I just thought, like, wow, that was kind of an inspiring thought to me. Like, so you can lead in multiple ways. You can be a leader by being the front man, but you could be the leader by being the guy that created the idea or the project or whatever it is. So that's where my mind naturally went, because I messed up, paid for my PhD with common sense. And so this is the kind of thing I think about. Right. So yeah, that was really, really a fascinating thing to see, that the songwriter was like, so like they loved him. Like, I mean, you could see like, well, he's the guy that wrote the Gambler. I mean, I mean, it was like he was some kind of rock star in his own right for that. Anyway, so maybe he was. I don't know the guy, but it was really interesting. Okay. So the weight of when we're walking around in the museum, different people had different displays. And so Merle Haggard would have his little case, and somebody else might have like a little plaque, and somebody else would have like this, like we had to exhibit, I don't know, what was that, like 500 feet long for, I can't remember the new star. There was like 500 feet of a case full of her memorabilia and outfits and all this kind of thing. And I'm like, it's interesting how they wait. I would have thought Merle Haggard, because like he's like one of the godfathers of this thing, right? I mean, one of the like great grandfathers of or somebody like that would have had a much larger display. So I thought it was interesting how they weighted who got what kind of what level of attention throughout the museum as well. Are you trying to look that up? I see.
Yeah, I couldn't remember her first name. I thought it was Kathy, but Casey Musgraves.
Musgraves, that's right.
Musgraves. Yeah,
I don't know. She doesn't do anything for me, but
yeah,
I don't even know. I may very well have heard a song like an Applebee's or something and not known that's who it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see how much weight was put on some people over another. And here's the next point: not everybody gets equal props. Like some people get far more attention than others. Maybe it's attention they don't deserve, but it's disproportional. It's not people. We don't We have this idea that everybody should get equally amounts, right? Like you should get exact same amount as me, as me, as me, as me, right? For show up and get your trophy. Doesn't work
Yeah.
that way. Not in real life. I mean, some people are superstars. Some people barely get noticed. Some people are somewhere in between. Yeah. So that's what jumped out at me. What do you think when you saw her display?
Well, at first, it was like, who is she?
Yeah.
No. I kept asking my wife if she knew, because for the last 2 years, she's been putting the music together for all of the events that we've done. And she goes, I'm not sure if anyone has asked for her yet or not, for a wedding. And then you begin to kind of read about her and her success thus far. It really is amazing. But it kind of goes back to what you were talking about being at the Grand Ole Opry, because although she did not appeal to me, I mean, imagine me taking my kids there. Like, oh, Dad, we don't want to go and see all this old stuff. And all of a sudden, this huge display of someone they can relate to.
Yeah. So I was just about to say, before you said that you've just positioned yourself, not knowing her, as one of the older characters or older appreciators of country music, as opposed to one of the newer set. And that's okay. I mean, you can like whichever you like. Here's another lesson. The clothes that were on display should never be worn in public. I mean, they all look like they came either out of Michael Jackson's closet or out of a rummage sale, or some kind of weird mashup of both of those things together. And I remember making that comment to you and just thinking like, you wouldn't walk down the street in this, or at least you'd get some strange looks. Okay, at any rate. So then there were some big lessons that I took away from it. And the biggest lesson, I think, was this, that I felt like a foreigner the whole time. I said I was going to go as a cultural anthropologist, but I made the observation, this is probably about what atheists feel like in church. Right? I mean, people that have no connection, didn't grow up in church, don't know exactly what goes on in the buildings, or what the secret handshake is in order to get in, whatever that is. Okay, by the way, if you're not a church goer, there's no secret handshake, and any church wants you to come on in and worship. Okay, so come on in, and you're welcome. Okay, so but there's like a whole genre of jargon in church land. And I just Googled that real quick and found this thing, 12 Christianese words and phrases we say. So all these will resonate with you. You know exactly what these mean. But to somebody from the outside, they wouldn't know quite necessarily how to define fellowship or quiet time, a hedge of protection, small group, traveling mercies, washed by the blood. That one sounds scary, right? Yeah. Anointed, hallelujah. Now, some things you'll hear, because you'll hear people say hallelujah in popular culture, but you wouldn't necessarily know like the meaning. Tithe, communion, the Lord's table or Eucharist, the body of Christ, or lay hands on, which sounds kind of scary again if you don't know what they're talking about. It sounds like you're about to get mugged. And so that was my experience. It would be like an atheist in church in that museum. I just don't know what's going on. I had a hard time processing where you saw, and this is kind of related. You saw in Technicolor, because the more you know, the more you see. And I'm only seeing a very grainy, sketchy black and white, because I don't have the pegs to hang it on. So what did you see while you were in there? Well, my atheist in church experience, you were seeing what?
You kind of mentioned this earlier, that as you're walking by, you're seeing just instruments.
Mm-hmm.
There's a guitar, Martin, whatever, Gibson, whatever. Okay. And then I look to go, oh my gosh, some of the country classics came with this instrument right here.
Yeah.
And, Hank Williams Sr. actually held this guitar. Oh my goodness. Wow. And even though I'm not a country music fan, it meant something to me to actually see visually what I had only heard for so many years. The music, what we hear, what we appreciate, it came from somewhere. And it came from somebody's performance, also from somebody's creativity to put the music together, like the guy that wrote The Gambler. We give him as much credibility as we do Kenny Rogers. Well, that night, they certainly did, right? Because
I mean, that was mind blowing to me because he
Yeah,
wasn't that great a performer, but they loved him
yeah,
because he had undeniable credibility.
yeah. And one other thing that you haven't mentioned yet, and this meant something to me, is what we now, I think, take for granted for entertainment, such as concerts coming to us,
Mhm.
regardless of the genre. But seeing some of the exhibits of people, their early buses, and you might recall that when I went to, you were still with us, to the Ernest Tubb record store.
Yep.
I recalled 10 years ago seeing a bus in the store. I was mistaken, it wasn't that store. It was another record store that he also owned that was just out of town, but his bus. But the fact that these buses was kind of a new thing way back, I guess in the 40s, early 50s, where they could, and this is to me very innovative, take the show to different cities. And the buses were not just for transportation, but became their home away from home.
Mhm.
And to me, just kind of thinking about things we take for granted,
Yeah.
had to have a start somewhere.
Yeah, and they were so innovative, and we keep innovating, right? We learned a
Mhm.
term in one of our sessions at the conference, bricolage, which means in French, do it yourself, and they did it themselves. Like the thing I found interesting most of any of the things behind the display was early banjos being made and that kind of thing. Like who thought of this? I like like who was the first guy to put that together or something like that. Now I'm not a banjo music fan, but wow, I mean it was pretty creative. So yeah, so you can learn from anyone anywhere, and I was just building dendrites left and right. This is not my market, but it is on market, and I'd be a fool to make a caricature of it. And this is a huge block. The South, like as a segment within the United States, the South really latches onto this in a big way. And so, to understand that is important. And even to understand, like when we're thinking about blocks, like we think just in America centric terms, America's only 5% of the world's population. How much more could I learn about all these other cultures in this
Mhm.
process and gain lessons from? Okay, at any rate, I'm about out of time. And I'm really grateful that you're here. When I was thinking about this, I always end every episode with a quotation for contemplation. And this one I thought immediately of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs said that creativity is just connecting things. That's such a great quote. He said it's creativity is just connecting things. It's just like pulling different ideas from different places. Like that bit about authority I'm going to be using in class. That songwriter who
Mhm.
had the audience eaten out of his palm of his hands, even with a bad voice, because he had the authority, the credibility, because he wrote The Gambler. So okay. And Steve Jobs, by the way, went on and said, when you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they didn't really do it. They just saw
Mhm.
something. But that's creativity.
Mhm.
That's the nature of it. So anyway, go to a cultural experience that's not in your normal lane. I mean, if you're uh I'm not even going to give you examples. Just go learn, expand, grow, and you'll see new things and you'll appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to give you the last word. Anything that you saw or you thought was interesting or you want to relate about any of this?
Yeah, I think just knowing where the roots are and anything that
Mhm.
uh, you appreciate today, to look back and go, where did this all start? And one of the very first exhibits that we saw, it was actually from the Appalachian kind of hills, but they didn't create it. As you said, they may have formed their own banjos and their instruments, but it came from Europe. Okay,
Mhm.
the early songs. And so, if you think that, I so appreciate fill in the blank today, it had a beginning. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of the appreciation for what you have today is finding where it started.
Mhm. Hey, that's really insightful too. And thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And thanks for even inviting me because I mean we wouldn't be talking about this now had you not
Oh, yeah.
invited me to come along. And
It was so much fun.
yeah, it was really a very interesting experience.